My name is Richard August, and I'll be your host. Welcome to State of the State. Our guest is Greg Amore, the Secretary of the State of Rhode Island. Welcome back, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
We appreciate you coming on. Mr. Secretary, I believe in your former life, before elected office, you were a civics and history teacher at East Providence High School.
That's correct.
And you have worked and announced an initiative to teach civics in the Rhode Island schools, particularly high school. Tell us about this high priority for you. I know you've testified, and explain that to the audience.
Sure, please. Sure. We're in our second full year and cohort. We have 48 high schools represented, over 100 students represented, and they are parochial schools, private schools, charter schools, public schools. These students come and meet with our civics team and then people from the community once a month, various places. They went to Hamilton in December. They witnessed Hamilton. They talked to the cast after the show. They went to the Edward M. Kennedy Center for the United States Senate, debated a bill on the floor. They workshop around key issues, and then it culminates in a summit, a 3-day summit, 2 nights at the Marriott in Providence. It's a legislative day, a judiciary day, and an executive branch day. And they immerse themselves in state government. They hear from state leaders, Democrats, Republicans, independents. They spend a day in the courts. They have dinner with the judges, and they're exposed to all this free of charge. The money is all raised through philanthropic donations, corporate donations, folks who believe that civic education is really important. And this starts with me recruiting students to this program from the various high schools I visited. And I've been in 90 different classrooms talking about the history of voting rights, why voting is so important, and why being an engaged citizen is so important. And we invite the local elected officials to come in, Democrats, Republicans, local, statewide, and they engage the students as well. And it's been a really rewarding program, but it's a really important program because we need students to be able to talk to one another about key issues without becoming emotional, and we want to give them a tool kit to use so that they can have those discussions, but in a civil manner, a respectful manner, despite the fact that they may disagree vehemently.
So you're able to reach out to a pretty broad cross-section of students at each school, and then you said 100 are selected?
Yeah, they volunteer. They're recruited. If we ask them if they're interested in this program, please let their teacher know. We have teachers that work with us from each of the schools, and those students then are part of the cohort. Now, we deal with lots and lots of students on a weekly basis, either through our classroom visits or mock elections, where we're showing them how government works. But for this program, it's about 100 kids. It was a little less than that last year. Second cohort, it was actually featured on the front page of last July 4th USA Today as a program that was really pushing for civic education and preserving our democracy.
Well, I think that's very important. As you and I discussed before we went on the air, there seems to be a real lack of understanding among young people, and now that they can vote at 18, right. They should have a basic understanding of how our operation of government
as all happens. Americans should.
I agree.
Yeah.
I would like to also talk briefly. You attended a Black History Month event at the Varnum Armory, where I'm a trustee and a docent, and what was your reaction to that event?
Fantastic event, and it celebrated the 1st Rhode Island Regiment, right. The first integrated regiment in American history that fought valiantly and with distinction during the American Revolution. In fact, for most of the American Revolution. And that was a great event to honor that regiment, but also their flag and their history. And then a few weeks later, we had the portrait on loan from the Museum of American History presented at the State House. It's still there. Mm-hmm. And Rhode Islanders can come see this magnificent portrait of the 1st Rhode Island Regiment marching through Philadelphia.
On the way to Yorktown.
On the way to Yorktown, correct. And these are the stories we need to tell. We need to tell the story of Nathaniel Greene, right, Washington's right-hand man. We need to tell the story of the naval contribution that Rhode Island had, our signers, Hopkins and William Ellery. They're fantastic American founding fathers that Rhode Islanders should know about, and that's part of a concerted effort with Rhode Island 250. But the Varnum program was excellent.
Yeah, we, of course, one of our trustees.
That museum is excellent.
Thank you. One of our trustees is a direct descendant of one of the soldiers that served in the first front. And that, you use the term integrated. was integrated in the sense that the men were slaves who could earn their freedom, freed slaves, and Narragansett Indians.
Correct.
The officers were all white, so to that
Correct.
extent, which was not uncommon.
Two companies of black and native soldiers,
Yeah.
9 companies of white soldiers, but they fought together.
Yeah. Well, you know, we were happy
They
to
were
have
fighting,
you.
I mean, the native soldiers and the black soldiers were fighting for dual freedoms, right?
Yes.
They were recruited because the British were doing the exact same thing.
Oh, yes.
They were recruiting slaves so that they could earn their freedom through fighting.
Yeah.
And so they were fighting for the freedom of the nation and the freedom of themselves. So it's
Yeah.
a unique story.
And it was a colony, Virginia colony, where the governor raised the
That's right.
all-black unit that fought.
That's
yes. I'd like to turn our attention. We're talking about government and constitution and so forth. You and I discussed briefly at this event something that's a controversial area called the assault weapon ban. As you know, 2 nights from now, on Wednesday the 26th of March, there's going to be what I call gun night on Smith Hill. The House Judiciary Committee will hear testimony about that. And the Senate, I think, is a week later. But
Right.
in his State of the State address, Governor McKee made a point of saying that he was going to amend the budget proposal with an assault weapon ban. Legislators told me, and on this program said that this was like an end around the legislative process, that a law should not be enacted through but amending the budget. And that we had Representative Jason Knight on the program, and he said, no, he said that's going to be stripped out and an assault weapon ban bill will be introduced. And sure enough, a short time later, he announced or sponsored the bill, and there was a press event that was attended by all 5 general officers, the leadership of the House and the Senate, Representative Knight, of course. And you, Mr. Secretary, spoke out. I saw your speech in support of this measure. I guess my question, and that's correct. You're
Correct.
strong.
And actually, Attorney General Noronha was not there. So it was
he
four,
wasn't?
4 general officers.
I'm sorry. I thought I saw him there standing. Okay, I'm surprised.
He supports the bill, but he was not there.
Of course he does.
Yeah.
So I guess, why did you speak out so strong on this controversial topic? I mean, it's got to go through the legislature.
Sure.
But you're a general officer, yes,
Sure.
but you're not going to sign the bill.
No, but we do stamp bills to show our support
Right.
For various bills. You know, they could have nothing to do with our office particularly, or everything to do with our office. And so when I was in the legislature, and I agree with Representative Knight and others that say this is a legislative process, not a budgetary item, I wholeheartedly agree with that. I sponsored or co-sponsored this legislation in some way, shape, or form. And so I have continued to advocate on behalf of it as a general officer. I have a bully pulpit, and I use it when I think the issue is important. And as you say, controversial. This is not a clear issue, it's a controversial issue, and that's the definition of a controversial issue, when it's not clear.
Yep. So will you be testifying at the House?
I will.
And the
It'll
Senate?
be brief testimony, but I will testify.
Yeah, well, they usually try to limit people to
Yeah.
3 minutes or whatever.
And I've testified before as Secretary of State. I've testified as a member of the House of Representatives. So you say gun night. You're right. I've been through a dozen gun nights.
Yeah.
Yes.
Always kind of entertaining.
Yeah.
So I asked this question of Representative Knight, and I'll direct it to you. All members of all the general officers and all members of the legislature take an oath upon entering office to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the state of Rhode Island. Representative Knight has actually come out and said publicly that his bill is unconstitutional, and that he knows it is, but they don't care because they're going to get it into law, and then it will take years to go and a lot of money to go through the appeals process. And I asked this question of him. I'll direct it to you. If you take an oath to uphold the Constitution and you're presented with a bill and ultimately a law that is unconstitutional, what's your view of that?
Yeah, I've never heard Representative Knight say that his bill is unconstitutional.
He texted that. Yes.
I have heard him say there are aspects of the bill that could be ruled unconstitutional. I have heard him say that.
Okay.
And I think what you will see in the legislative process, and you've been around a long time, so you know how this works, the sausage making, so to speak. What's presented as the bill when it is put into the hopper is usually much different than what comes out of the hopper, right? And so the bill as presented today, I'm sure, will be much different when it makes its way to the House and Senate floor, if it makes its way to the House and Senate floor. And part of that, I'm sure, is around the registration aspect of that.
We're going to get to that in a minute.
And I think that's probably a fair look at it. So when I come out in support of this legislation, I come out in support of the concept of an assault weapons ban, and I let the public and the legislators go through the hearing process and then the deliberation process, and I count on the fact that what they'll put forward, they feel comfortable around it being constitutional. And so I think that's what will happen, and I think what you'll see if a bill does come to a vote on both the House and Senate floors is you'll see a different version of this bill. So, you know, you can say that you take an oath to the Constitution until this becomes law, or until the Supreme Court decides that it's unconstitutional. My view is that it's kind of in line with what the nation believed for over 200 years,
which is?
That the Second Amendment right was a collective right, not an individual right. And so, you know, that's being debated now, and that's being debated in the courts.
It's been decided.
Oh, it hasn't been decided.
Yes, it has.
No.
The United States Supreme Court.
We'll get into that because if it had been decided, then those assault weapons bans that exist in states right now would no longer exist, and they do. So it has not been decided.
Because we're going to make a distinction. The Supreme Court has ruled that the right to own and carry a firearm is not a collective right. It is an individual right. And the Bruin decision in New York clarified that. And it also said that the idea that, it only applies to muskets is not correct because it refers to arms in modern sense as well as antiques. That's been decided. Now, you're to the point about some states. How many states have an assault weapon ban?
So, I don't know. The New England states, right, other than Maine.
No.
Correct? Vermont and Maine don't have it.
Only two have it. Massachusetts.
Connecticut, Massachusetts.
Right.
Okay.
So there's 9.
California.
There's 9 states.
Illinois.
And the District of Columbia.
Yeah.
Okay. Hawaii.
California's been in place since 1989.
Well, we're going to get to that in a second. So the point is that.
But let's go back to Bruin, because Bruin didn't cancel out Heller.
It didn't.
It enhanced Heller.
Yes.
And in Heller, Scalia said, this does not mean that there can't be restrictions. He was very clear about that in his majority opinion. So I don't think I think it's been decided that you can use historical precedent, right? And that's what Justice Thomas said, right? Let's look back and use historical precedent when we're making these decisions. But I also think that Heller clearly says that there can still be restrictions. And I think an assault weapons ban is one of those restrictions. Now, when I say there was 200 years of precedent, right, that's correct. There was 200 years of precedent where the courts and society looked at gun rights as collective, based on not necessarily the weapon itself, but the idea that the militia was created to protect the states first and then the nation second. So that's a long period of precedent. And so when we say that something has been decided, I don't agree with that. I think things have yet to be decided around that holistic question.
Who are the militia?
Well, today.
No. Who was you said for 200 years the idea was.
Sure.
Who made up the militia?
Yeah, the people the people who defended the states. Yeah. Right. And the interests of the states. And then collectively. Tried to defend the nation, the burgeoning nation.
Okay.
Yeah.
In Connecticut, there was a Militia Act before the Constitution was enacted.
After 1792.
No, 1792 was the Militia Act.
89.
Okay. So that's when the Supreme Court said, okay, you got to go to that point.
But the Militia Act didn't talk about a right. The Militia Act talked about a requirement.
That's correct.
That's not a right. That's a requirement.
What the Militia Act said is that every able-bodied male between a certain age, I think it was 16,
correct,
was required to have a firearm.
Requirement is not a right.
Well, what would you call it if the government...
Call it a requirement.
Okay, so for 200
Just like
years...
you are required to have
So for 200
car insurance, right, in this state,
Yeah.
but that's not a right.
True. But to have... you said there was consensus that it only applied to the militia. Well,
200
the militia,
years of precedence.
But the militia...
And three
Okay.
Supreme Court decisions. I mean, I'm just talking about history.
I want to move. I want to get
Yeah.
off that point
Sure.
because I guess we're using this term assault weapon. Can you define an assault weapon?
Yeah, I would say it's a military-style weapon, similar to the AR-15 or M16, and that functions in that capacity.
Is there a difference between them? You use two terms, AR-15 and M16.
Well, the M16 has an automatic and a semi-automatic function.
Correct.
The AR-15 does not.
So therefore,
Because 1934, this nation decided you can restrict and limit firearms, and so they eliminated automatic weapons.
Correct.
And you're
Yes.
a military person, and I respect your adherence to the military and your son's service and sacrifice. But the military, 98% of the time, they're using their M16s on single fire, semi-automatic fire, because it's more accurate. It's not necessarily an entirely different weapon.
all right, but the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives has, in their regulation, they define an assault weapon as one having the capability of automatic fire. Okay, so the bill that has been introduced, I have the Senate version, but it's a mirror image, tries to define an assault weapon in terms of several characteristics. And we had on this program back when Governor Raimondo had her working group on gun safety, one of the co-chairmen, who was a colonel of state police at the time, came on, and he said that that group, which included nobody from the Second Amendment community, but within that group, they could not come up with a definition of assault firearm, okay? So the bill has, and I'm going to give you some cheat cards because I know you don't remember. I'd like you to tell us what the bill says, and I'm going to point it out for the audience, what the items are that make this an assault weapon.
Sure. If I can see this. So what would you like me to do?
Well, I just want to point them out as
A heat shield around the
around
the barrel.
Yeah. So
I don't have my glasses.
Okay, all right.
I'm sorry.
Well, I didn't want you to say, okay, I don't know what the bill is. So this does not particularly have a heat shield. They're talking about something that's ventilated that dissipates the heat, okay?
A flash suppressor.
Which is at the end of the muzzle that reduces the muzzle flash.
Right. A threaded barrel for a silencer.
Okay, this one does not because it has the flash suppressor, but silencers
They're banned.
They're with a 10-year prison sentence if you even own one, not if you're using one.
So is that an infringement, banning a silencer?
No, it's a regulation.
But how about banning automatic weapons? Is that an infringement?
Well, it's a fine point.
Okay. Pistol grip or
Which is this
thumb
thing right
hole
here.
stock?
This is pistol grip. The thumb hole stock is a little different because it has a. Okay.
Okay, and then you have a semi-automatic firearm here.
Yep.
Right. A detachable magazine or a fused magazine exceeding 6 rounds.
This one happens to exceed 6, but we have a law that limits it to 10.
Folding or telescoping stock.
This right here, so it would be able to be adjusted.
A bayonet mount.
This one does not have a bayonet mount, but it'd be out here, which I don't think would be used in a mass shooting anyway, right? You wouldn't run around bayoneting people.
No.
Okay.
No. And a grenade launcher.
This one doesn't have it, but it would be here under the barrel, which they're already illegal, and you can't even possess them. Okay, so that's the definition. But so the question that people are asking is, and I asked this of several supporters of this, which of these makes this more lethal than any other semi-automatic rifle?
Well, I think what makes it more lethal is the velocity. Right. So I fired an AR-15. I fired a 9mm. I know the difference in feel, and I know the difference in ease. And the weapon like you're holding is incredibly easy to use. And the velocity creates far more damage. In fact, every time I've testified on this bill, I've talked about mitigation. That's what I've talked about. I've talked about the nation banning automatic weapons based on mitigation, and this ban based on mitigation. This is an easy weapon to use and creates more damage when it is used, and therefore I think it could fall under a restricted weapon.
So this is because it's easy to use. Other semi-automatic rifles that would not be banned are harder to use?
So how many semi-automatic rifles would not be banned under this
Oh, a lot.
law? So give me an example. I'm just asking you for an example. I'm not questioning you. I'm just asking for an example.
Remington 742, Winchester old model.
And what is it about them that makes them different?
Nothing.
Except for the things that I just read off.
Well, because these have the characteristics, and what happened, you know, we had a national, a federal ban on assault rifles.
I do.
Rifle, okay. From 1994 to 2000, 10 years, and then it sunset, and the government sponsored, this was not done by the gun industry, the government sponsored 2 independent studies which the FBI compiled, and there was no correlation between the availability of these so-called assault rifles and a reduction in, a ban on them, and the reduction or correlation to violent crime.
But now, there was a reduction in mass shootings.
Well, the Columbine High School...
I guess it all depends on how you want to look at the stats.
The very first mass school shooting occurred at Columbine, Colorado during that ban, and the perpetrators there used shotguns. I will also point out that in Connecticut, shortly after the sunsetting of the federal law, Connecticut imposed a ban on assault rifles. Adam Lanza killed his mother, stole her Bushmaster rifle, and went to Sandy Hook. And a horrific event. So.
Oh, I thought the timeline was reversed. I thought they passed an assault weapons ban after the.
No, it was in place. And hers was legal because it was grandfathered in, which the legislation proposed.
Correct.
Allows for a grandfather. If you already own one, you can keep it.
Right.
But you have to pay a $25 fee, and you have to register every single firearm.
And we talked about that, right? So that's the part I think that faces the most judicial scrutiny.
Of course, because we have a law that says you can't do, the state can't do that.
And I would guess that part will be gone if this comes to a vote.
Yeah, it also raises the question about you're imposing a fee on a right that is guaranteed under the Constitution. It'd be the same as you coming out and saying we want to have a poll tax.
Right. Right.
I mean, it's the very same thing, but everybody's going, well, the poor police departments are going to have to register all these things, so you got to give them $25 for everybody that comes in.
Yeah, so I think that part of what has been written as model legislation will be changed. And all the indications I'm getting from those who are negotiating this, if it gets to that point, is that will be the case. That'll be changed. And you bring up law enforcement. I've been around long enough to know when law enforcement was, and the Chiefs Association, was testifying for the assault weapons ban in the early years because they felt they were being outgunned on the streets.
Can I comment on that?
Just one second.
Go ahead.
And the testimony I remember was that these weapons can be so easily fired and they are so powerful because the ammunition is light, the barrel is long, that we're at a disadvantage. And I remember that vividly. And now that over the course of years, that support has kind of been fractured among law enforcement. But I've heard the same thing from military folks who've served and say, yeah, this is not what should be on our streets.
Let me just comment on that, what the police chief's situation was. I was at the very first hearing. It was Representative Agello from Providence who first introduced this ban, shortly after Sandy Hook, I think. And I was there. The chief, of the head of the Chiefs of Police Association got up and spoke against it. Everybody was stunned. And the chairman of the Judiciary Committee asked, why are you opposing it? He said, because retired police officers would not be exempt. So he looked at Representative Agello and said, amend the bill to get their support. And it's been in there ever since, which is the obvious question I've asked. Why does a retired police officer need an assault weapon?
Yeah, that's a good question.
It is a good question.
It's a good question.
Okay. But
I don't have the answer to that question.
There is none.
Yeah.
If you're a retired police officer, you have no need for it. You don't have any arrest authority or anything else once you're retired.
I guess, are there certain retired police officers that can be called back to duty?
Well, even if they did, this bill says they can, this bill allows police officers on duty to have one.
Yeah.
And as far as being outgunned, in one interview, we had a chief of police here. I think he was with the Attorney General, Peter Kilmartin.
Yeah.
And I said, well, how do your patrol officers go out in his town? Well, they all had a 12-gauge shotgun in the front. They were all carrying Glocks with three high-capacity magazines. And in the trunk, they had either a Bushmaster or an AR-type rifle and plenty of ammunition. Now, I was speaking to one police officer who said when he was on duty with the Marines in Iraq, he's on patrol in Rhode Island, more heavily armed than he was in Iraq.
Now, did that exist 12 years ago,
Yes.
or was that a response to the many shootings that have happened, and so police geared up?
No,
Because I remember distinctly hearing police officers say, we're outgunned. I heard the state police colonel say the same thing. So I mean, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Did they start arming themselves because they felt outgunned?
I don't really think that once these things became more popular in the hands, then the police were upgrading constantly.
Yeah, and I think the key to this entire debate is that we're having a logical, respectful discussion. And if the Supreme Court were to strike down any of these bans,
Yep.
like a good American, I accept what the Supreme Court says. That's the law of the land. And, you know, going forward, precedent changes, as I've made the case already. Mm-hmm. And if it changes again, you know, I would hope that folks on the other side of the debate would also accept that. Yeah. You know, I'm a little concerned with, you know, the criticism of folks like me who don't want to ban guns and who believe that you should be able to protect yourself, but don't need a weapon like this to do so, are talked about as tyrannical. Or as someone who is antithetical to constitutional principles, when I've made the case that has not been the case throughout the history of the nation. So this is a fair debate, and I think you've made good points tonight. I think I've made good points tonight. I think we should be able to have this conversation and know that whoever ends up on the wrong side of a Supreme Court decision accepts it. You know, because
hopefully
that's what we should do as Americans, right?
We agree on that. So
yeah. So I mean, you know that I was a history teacher. You mentioned that for 28 years in the classroom, and unlike most history teachers, I was actually a history major. I was not an education major, and then worked toward my master's, and then shifted to public policy. You know, when you read the Federalist, you know the focus is really on the fear of a standing army.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, that was if you look at all of the discussion around the Second Amendment when it was being debated, it was the fear of a standing army.
We agree.
And boy, that genie is out of the bottle, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, and by the way, our police departments are standing armies. Never mind our standing army.
Paramilitary, yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I mean, that concern, which was Jefferson's concern, Madison's concern, is what moved us to have the Second Amendment as drafted.
Yep, and I agree. And that. We have like 1 minute left. This has been I'm really glad to have this discussion with you. And I guess my last question would be, you know, we're all kind of familiar with what's going on, particularly in Providence with shootings. Do you have any idea how many of the shootings involve these types of firearms?
Yeah, I would imagine very few.
Okay.
Right. So what advocates say is that in a case like Sandy Hook, someone has a chance. If this is the type of weapon that is not used, that is used, right? So that's my mitigation argument. I'm trying to mitigate just like they did in 1934 when they said Al Capone and his crowd couldn't use a Tommy gun. To me, it's a very similar restriction.
Similar to okay, well, this has been very, very interesting, and we want the audience to know that this is the type of debate that we hope will happen during the legislative process. And I would close with this one question with the brief time we have left. If this bill comes out with the registration still in it, where would you stand?
Yeah, you'll hear me say that that's not a good idea.
Okay.
You'll hear me say that. Yeah.
Okay.
And there are a couple of ways to do that, but you'll hear me say that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we want to thank you. We want to thank the audience. We'd love to have you come on. You're one of the few public officials that are very accessible to the public, and we do appreciate that. And I know the audience does, and people here at State of the State do.
My pleasure.
Thank you, audience, for watching this edition of State of the State. And hope we'll see you soon in the future. We'll probably see other people come in and talk about this as well.